A Classic Horror Story is a 2021 Italian film about a group of carpoolers who get into an accident and then when they finally come around to their senses, realize they're in the middle of nowhere instead of on the street. And they're next to a creepy as all hell cabin. Cue the scary music.
Questa stanza non ha più.
Hello everyone and welcome to Nocturnal Horrors. My name is Sean Mazeral and I absolutely love the way this film starts out. I am so intrigued by it. I have so many questions that I want answered immediately, but I know I'm still in Act 1, so the mystery first, the reveal second, right? But that doesn't mean I can't still want those answers. This whole thing is very meta. We're not talking a little meta here. We're talking all out meta. So if you don't like that sort of thing, if you're not vibing with that, this isn't the movie for you. But as much meta as they love to throw out there in this movie, they're also kind of just flat out telling us what they're doing. I have no problem with the film being meta, but at the same time, you don't have to tell me everything. You don't have to make it super obvious. Besides, this type of film is made for horror fans, and as horror fans, we know what you're doing, we know where you're going, we know where you're angling at. You don't need to just hit us over the head with it. We got you, we know, we've been around all sorts of horror. We're in the cabin's presence like in Gretel and Hansel. We're in the know like a cabin in the woods. We feel the Wolf Creek vibe and the Ritual, The Hills Have Eyes, Kill List, Midsommar. And we're getting all these vibes, and honestly, all these homages and references are really giving the filmmakers an edge, because there are certain points in the film where you're like, well, why would the character do that? And then you're like, well, if you want to harken back to 80s slashers, that happens all the time. So they're either being hella meta, or maybe they're just making one or two little slip-ups. But you don't really know, and you go with it because you're just vibing with it. You're totally vibing with it. A Classic Horror Story does this throughout the entire film. So you might be thinking it's a bad setup or a terrible horror trope, but you also might be realizing that they know all these movies too, and they know what they're doing, and it gives them absolute carte blanche to go wherever they want to go. And trust me, they do. And what exactly is a classic horror story? I love this about that title because every single person who watches this movie has a different idea of what a classic horror story is. Just look at the deconstruction of horror throughout the decades in Netflix's recent Fear Street. But say you grew up watching films from the 70s, right? Well, maybe a classic horror story is The Omen, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Exorcist, Wicker Man. Is it folk horror, haunted house horror, cabin in the woods horror, 80s slashers, supernatural twists, possession films? I mean, where do we go from here? Is it 90s meta like Scream, or the 2000s where they rip off every Asian horror classic? There's classic horror stories everywhere and from every age, and that gives this film lots of wiggle room to play with. And this is an Italian film, so it takes from its own, but then it's also got this spaghetti western feel, not necessarily in vibe or mood, but Italians doing American horror. And yes, I feel like this is American horror in terms of classic horror stories. This has a lot of the 70s American films, a lot of the 80s American films, but like I said, it's got a lot more than just that. So as much spaghetti western as it feels like at times, it's still got a whole lot of that mafioso in it as well, and I love that. And as easy as it is to just have a group of teenagers in this film making silly decisions, this film doesn't go there. There's a doctor with some secrets, the carpool driver with a love of cinema, but he's doing the Instagram thing at the moment. There's a couple supposedly in love, and a newly pregnant woman wondering what's her next move. These aren't those one-dimensional characters that they could have used but chose not to, even though those horror tropes would have worked in the film probably as well. They could have gone the one-dimensional blonde bimbo, jock, and silly dude who likes to smoke a little weed. They could have played with those tropes, but they didn't. They decided to make interesting characters, and that was important and a great move. They have fights amongst each other after making difficult decisions, and yeah, I gotta tell you, it's not all black and white. There are gray areas. They might do things that you don't want them to do. You might actually agree with some of the decisions and some of the proclamations that the selfish asshat is thinking. That's okay. There's gray areas. I love it when these films aren't just black and white. We must save the day. I am the hero. Nah, man, we don't have to do that. Gray areas are beautiful areas, and I love how this film does that. Honestly, sometimes, isn't it just better to save yourself? I don't know. I mean, you be the judge. And as much as this film loves to give homages and references to other great horror films, it still feels completely its own in its own world, creating moments of suspense and intrigue. I really enjoyed this film. We also have some really refreshing, enjoyable villains in this. It's not easy to come up with a good villain. It's just not. And I like what they did here. Now I gotta say, this is a film that you might not completely enjoy. But it's also not a, I either hate it or I love it. This is a film where you might really like half of it and hate the other half. You might really enjoy the beginning and hate the ending. You might hate the beginning and love the ending. You might just love the middle. I think there's really some gray areas here. You could like the film the first time around and you could hate the film the second time around. I love the grayness here. I really do. Are there plot holes in this film? Yeah, I think so. Are the plot holes big enough for me that I couldn't enjoy it? No. I just went with it. Guys, just go with it. Suspend some disbelief for a little bit and make yourself happy. Go for it. See what happens. Bottom line, this is a fun, dark film. If you like things that go a little meta, if you like picking out all those homages and all those references, this is your film. If you like films with a little twist, this is your film. If you don't like that sort of stuff, probably stay away. But have fun with this one. They had fun creating it for us. Let's have a little fun watching it. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button as well as that subscribe button. I'd love to share more with you. Thanks so much.